This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
ये है भारत FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Things We Carry. I am so excited today to be talking with Dr. Raji Natarajan Tyagi. Her bio is incredible, and I know she just recently did a session with Saz for Cause, who this session would not be possible without, and of course, Bharat FM. And my mom could not stop raving about your session. That's the first thing that you need to know. And I'm really excited to hear more about your background and your story and how you kind of came into this profession. But a little bit of background about Dr. Raji. She is a professor and branch director in the Couple and Family Therapy Program, housed within the California School of Professional Psychology at Align International University. Her research interests are in the area of immigration, bicultural parenting, cross-cultural training, cross-cultural relevance of family therapy, cultural competency, self of therapist training and supervision, qualitative research, and systemic training and evaluation. She has several peer-reviewed publications and book chapters on the above topics. So welcome, and thank you again so much for making the time today.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm honored to be invited to this program. So thank you very much.
Of course, our pleasure completely. I think we're gonna just jump right into the questions, and so we can understand a bit more about, like I said, how you came to this field and your inspiration for being here. So, do you have an immigration story, you, your parents, or your family, and just how you kind of got your start in this country and settled down here?
Sure. So I would say my immigration, I would categorize it as a privileged immigration. So when I'm originally from Chennai, and I have two older brothers. I'm from the Brahmin caste back home, and still am. So I education was pushed a lot in my family, and my brothers, they went into engineering, very much, very stereotypical engineering, computer science fields, and they were the first ones who came to the US before I did. So they were, in fact, in my family circles, in my extended family circles, were the first ones to kind of come here for education, right? And to get accepted into universities here. So they kind of, started the trend, so to speak, in my community back home. And I never imagined I would be here. And I don't think my family imagined I would be here, because as a single woman, they didn't want me to, I guess, they did not imagine that I would come here. I did have a cousin sister who also came here for education before I did. So in a lot of ways, when I was back home, I already knew about the US, how the educational system kind of worked, or I thought I knew about it, but at least it didn't seem completely foreign to me. And I kind of followed a path, so to speak. Like, my brother was, I remember when he set up a computer in our home, and we got the good old dial-up internet back home, and he was like, I think you need to email professors, and so I did have some sort of guidance. So I call my immigration as very privileged, although my mom was kind of shocked that I would actually do this. Right, like she kind of was like, thought I was just just talked about it, not really meaning to, but I actually sat for my GRE, my TOEFL, I applied. She never thought that it would really come to fruition.
And you're like, Mom, I was literally telling you that this is what was happening. Like, you just didn't believe me. Like, I told you.
Yes. Yes, and I think she would probably, if it was up to her, she would not have sent me here without getting married.
Okay.
But yeah, kind of happened and I got accepted. A little bit of other background. I did my master's in social work in India,
Okay, wow.
which was again quite non-traditional in my family circles, at least. They couldn't. They were very disappointed that I didn't go into STEM, but I was able to. I think I'm the youngest one in my family. So I think by the time I came around, the fight was gone in them. So they were like willing, and maybe because I'm a woman too, they kind of gave me a longer rope, so to speak, in terms of the discipline that I could choose. And because they probably always thought that there would be a man to support me. So even if I ended up in a
Yeah.
path that took me nowhere,
Yeah. And
they
like
were
a
willing to.
passion path rather than like a
Yes.
STEM. Yeah, that makes sense. So you already knew in India that this is the field that you largely wanted to be in, is like working with people and social work and everything. So you already knew that well before coming here.
Yeah, I knew that I was going to be in the field of social work, service, human professions. I knew the field, but I had never heard of the marriage and family therapy or couple and family therapy. That's a field I've never heard of. So I was actually looking into those old Peterson's guide in the American consulate. When I was flipping through it, I was looking for actually social work programs.
Oh,
When I
wow.
came across this discipline, my specialization back in India was in family and child welfare.
Okay.
And so I knew that's my area I wanted to go into more. I worked in a domestic violence shelter back in India. I would work with families, take them to family court. Um, and I was kind of frustrated with my work there because all I did was take them back and forth, and we would have women in our shelters who would stay there and then eventually go back to their abusive households. So I was kind of a little frustrated about the work that I was doing. I felt like I need to be doing more. I didn't have the words. But when I looked at this field, I was like, wow, there's something that actually matches what I dream of. And so I got here, and and I've not looked back, and it's been an amazing. I feel an amazing fit for me.
Oh my God, that's amazing. And when you came here, you already had like a community and everything. But where did you settle down when you first came to the US? Like, where did you go to your master's program and everything?
So I went to Purdue University, uh, Indiana. So India to
What was
Indiana.
Okay, that's cute. I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
India to Indiana, but not at all the same.
Not even close.
Snow and it's fascinating. Like I said earlier, I thought I knew what the US was about because my brothers were here,
Mhm.
but I think there was some big differences, and I was still in for a huge culture shock because I was not into a field that is infested, or so to speak, or highly populated with with Indians, right?
Yeah.
Like Purdue is a favorite destination for Indians, but it's all in the
Step.
computer science and engineering field.
Mhm.
So I had
Mhm.
a big Indian student community, but not in my everyday program. When I stepped into my MFT world, it was all white.
Yeah.
Maybe one or two Black, maybe one Latino person. I was very fortunate because my cohort actually had one other Indian person, and then the cohort that came after me had another Indian person.
Okay, three. There we go.
Three, and then we really became very tight, and we published together,
Wow.
and we really learned so much from each other. And of course, one of them had come to the US as a kid, and she
Okay.
was pretty much uh,
Raised here.
raised here
Yeah.
through her developmental years. So it was just fascinating for us to see
Mhm.
our dynamic and listen to each other's immigration stories. And the third person in the trio, she was older woman, divorced, in a wheelchair, who had come to the US. So all
Okay.
three of our stories were so different.
Yeah.
Um,
And
And it
when
just created a great
dynamic, I'm sure. And
dynamic.
I feel like even with the three of you, there's already so much like diversity in terms of your backgrounds and just the way you live life. And you're saying this larger program was primarily white. So when you were learning all this information for the first time, did you feel like, oh, this is not how marriages work in like Indian society? Were there different perspectives kind of introduced to you guys? Was it culturally sensitive at that
Oh,
point?
absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
Okay, I thought you were gonna say absolutely yes, and I was like, "Oh my god, wow, okay." And what year was this for some context, if you don't
Yeah,
mind?
I came here in 98.
Okay, okay.
98. So my program was primarily white male. It was only after I went into the program we had hired even a female faculty who was also
Wow.
white, though. So it was primarily white male dominated. It's a
Yeah.
male dominated field, just like very patriarchal. Even the family life is very patriarchal, and so was the field.
That is so interesting. I would think, and I guess I'm wrong, that there would be more women in marriage and family therapy, but I'm kind of surprised to hear that that wasn't the case at all, actually.
Actually, it is not very surprising because MFT, when it comes, the way it originated is like as a branch of psychology. So the field of psychology is also, when you think about Freud and Jung and very male
Yeah,
dominated figures, um, and now it is highly feminized. Now, if you look at the field, there's a feminization of the field in general, but it's very similar to most other professions that still the leadership and people with power still tend to be men and white men.
listen, we hate to
And
see
that's hopefully slowly changing, but it's very much
too slow,
still
Dr.
so.
Raji, way too slow for my taste. This is like, I'm like, we need to get with the program. But so when you were listening to all of this stuff, were you like, this doesn't really make sense, or I could see a different perspective to this? And other than your little pod of the three of you, was there any place for you to kind of explore that? Or were you able to do that only in your like later work when you were starting to mentor your grad students and things like that? When did that kind of come along for you?
I think it started right there because it is
Mhm.
very stark for me. So, pretty much right from my dissertation, all of my research work, even in my doctoral work, was about cultural relevance of family therapy.
Mhm.
Um, and, uh, the fascinating thing about family therapy is also there are several aspects of therapeutic work that draws from, you know, like some of what we consider alternative ways of healing, but it's kind of been appropriated and built into. So there's a lot of what we learn is not it's not new under the sun, new thoughts
Mhm.
under the sun,
Mhm.
but definitely packaged in a very Western kind of
Mhm.
way. uh, and there's a real problem with that because when you're trying to work with families and you come in with a norm of a white family, right? Then your Indian families don't fit the mold. So it's
Yeah.
very easy to pathologize these families and
Mhm.
say, like, for example, simple things I would say, like child development. If you think about Indian families, our parents feed their children for, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years, maybe even well into high school.
Mhm.
Dependence is highly encouraged in
Mhm.
Indian families, right?
Okay.
Whereas for American families, independence is encouraged right from like when they are independently feeding themselves. Like the minute they start eating solid food, they start putting them in a high chair and so there are very basic differences in the way even child development is considered, right? So
Interesting.
every stage of life, um, the cultural expectations are very different about what's considered normal development to what other cultures have. And our cultures have also developed in response to our geographic economic situations, right? Because we grow up, we all tend to stay in the same household for long periods of time until you're married, not because we don't want to get out, but economic, cultural, contextual issues kind of, in Chennai, youngster can't afford, or
Yeah.
anywhere you can't afford. So there are lots of contextual issues that are create big cultural differences,
I
right?
also think about like Aishwarya Rai, who was on that Oprah episode. I don't know if anyone has seen this years ago. And Oprah's like, wait, you still live at home with your parents? Like, you are the number one actress in India and you're like 20 something years old. And she's like, yeah, we just live with our parents till we get married. That's just like what we do. And she's like, this is insane. And she was like, you're Aishwarya Rai. And she's like, it's very normal for us. So I always think about that. And I was like, wow, some things that we take for granted like that, people don't even realize that this is kind of just very normal to us. And I think even growing up here, I mean, I was born in India, but I primarily grew up here. I think that there's stuff that I think that I understand about the way people function in the US. And even I'm still surprised. And I think most of my closest friends are also South Asian or Indian or people of color, because I think even when it comes to friend structures and what you expect of friends and close friends and everything is so, so different than I think maybe if you're not a person of color in general. I think the differences show up everywhere in expectations and what you can expect and what you can't expect. So yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. And then when it comes to a field like therapy, where someone has a power to label you as, you're functional, dysfunctional, this is right or this is wrong, then it's all the more important for therapists to be culturally aware and humble and curious and not just be too quick to label.
Yeah,
Right.
completely. And I think all my friends and I have talked about this as we got older. We were like, you know what? I think like therapy is always a great investment, regardless of if you think you like need it or not. And I'm very obsessed with being like, why am I like this? And why do I feel this way? Because I feel like it gives me more of an understanding of how I tend to react in certain situations. And we've all been like, you know what, maybe, and it might be totally fine for some people. This is just the case for us. All of us, I think, have had a stint with someone who is maybe a white therapist. And I think all of us have found that the approach to dealing with family, to dealing with all of that, it's just really, really different. And then it's like, no, one of my friends was like, that's my mother. I can't just cut her off. Like, what do you mean cut her off? So, because her therapist was like, your mom is toxic and you need to cut that relationship off. And she's like, it's my mom. I'm not doing that. Like, so I think it's
That's the
hard.
story I hear from lots of couples who have gone to mainstream therapists and
Yeah.
then, have the same, like, I'm complaining about my husband or my
Mhm.
mother-in-law, but the idea is not to, same thing again, is not to go for a divorce or label them or, I
Yeah.
want to figure out how to work within the system, right?
Yes.
But they get labeled as, oh, you are submissive, you're oppressed, and you don't know how to speak up. So there's a lot of patronization that happens when especially
Yeah.
women go into therapy, and we are looked upon as, oh, you are, you can't stand up for yourself, you're very oppressed, right?
Yeah.
That may be very true as well. I'm not saying that's not possible. That may be true, but there are also additional factors, like,
Mhm.
of understanding how the culture works and, how family dynamics happen and how to work within it and not be too quick to label.
Yeah, I think for you to say that there is a gray area is probably very comforting to hear for a lot of people. And I think if I look at, say, even like my parents' generation, I don't think that therapy is particularly normalized there, because I think the view is still that if you go, that means there's like something wrong with you, or there has to be something wrong with you if you're going, or if you go, you're going to get this like very extreme label or diagnosis. And it's not just seen as a comfortable place to just share your feelings maybe without judgment. And I think even just talking through it, I've found sometimes like the way you talk it through with a friend, though of course your therapist is not your friend, but I think it's just helpful to put your thoughts out there. And I don't think it's still seen in that way. And there's some fear, like you're saying, of being labeled or of being told that everything you've thought is true is wrong. And that is probably a very earth-shattering, jarring thought to have.
No, absolutely, because you're made to feel like, you're something is wrong with the way you are.
And
Um,
living, yeah.
you're
Same.
living. And I do think that's such it's sad, right? That uh, people in our community don't feel like this is a safe space.
Mhm.
But I think over time it will change. I do believe it will
Yes.
change, and it's already changing. I
Yes.
I mean, my practice, I have, pretty much 90% of my clients are South Asians,
Mhm.
and I've seen people who I think are the most unlikely people to reach out for therapy, talk therapy, actually turn up, like older
Amazing.
couples, people who really struggle with English, but who feel like this is a space that they can
Oh,
own
it's
and they can come
amazing.
in and talk. Like, I'm surprised at who reaches out to me, and I think things are changing.
That is so great to hear because I just think it's also a society, like you said, where there's a lot of dependence and there's a big checklist culture that we kind of have where sometimes I've read books recently, like Tell Me How to Be is this book by this young Indian American author called Neil Patel, and his mom is basically talking through the fact that, I shouldn't have gotten married. I shouldn't have had kids. I was just on this like conveyor belt through life and I was
Mhm.
just going through every motion, but I think the fact that people are just taking a second to think about their life now and then
Mhm.
think about, is their life right now what they want it to look like or what they always thought it would look like. I think that's really amazing. And I don't think it's ever too late to do that and make a change. It's hard, but it's not too late.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think this is one resource. I don't want to say therapy is the only way to heal. I think traditionally we have had so many ways of healing, and I
Mhm,
really honor all the different ways of
mhm,
healing and exploring that our culture provides. And sometimes language doesn't capture everything.
mhm.
Language only captures so much of our experience, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes you may feel more calmness and healing, and you know have a therapeutic environment with things like, I don't know, listening to music or listening to a sermon, or
mhm,
doing yoga. I mean, there are just so many different ways, and I want to honor all those ways.
mhm,
And therapy is one such option. And I think this is an option that fits for several and may
mhm,
not be a fit for others.
mhm,
But hopefully, more in our community are able to reach out to this resource. And my hope as a program director at Alliant is to really be able to put out more therapists of color who are curious and humble and are able to
100%.
work with clients where they're at, and not come in with
Guns blazing, just being
yes,
like, "I'm gonna
exactly.
save you," and it's like, that's not the point. That's, like,
Yes,
not the point at
not at
all.
all.
Yeah, 100%. And going back to, like, what you were learning in your program and just, like, throughout your career, how did your value system, if at all, did it change in the wake of kind of all the information that you were getting? First, as going through your master's in social work in India, and then again in your program at Purdue in the US. Were there any moments where you were like, wow, I'm questioning XYZ about what I always thought to be true and the norm? Was anything like that happening?
Yeah, I would definitely say, like, one thing I give a lot of credit to the educational system here is that it gives you space to be critical,
Mhm.
which, even back in India, when I was going through social work, we are heavily, heavily influenced by Western thoughts, even in India. The
Oh,
theories
wow.
that we learn, everything is from very traditional Western, mental health theories is
Interesting.
all that we learn, and there isn't space to question it.
Mhm.
And here, what I credit this system is it allows you space to be critical of what you're learning, and that really helped me critique what I was reading and also find space to critique myself, my own value system, um, and really, Erickson talks about, stages of identity development.
Mhm.
And I feel like when you don't have that space to critically think, then you are in a place called foreclosure, right?
Mm.
Before you have even had a chance to critically think about why do I believe in what I believe in, you have just accepted it because that's what my parents say so, or accepted it because this is what my culture says, or
Mm.
this is what I see in media. So you have already, just accepted it. But
Yeah.
the good thing is when you have that space, it lets you critique and really think about why do I believe in what I believe in. And I have
Yeah.
been very surprised to feel like I was able to go back to my roots, right, and see what I brought in, value what I brought
Mhm.
in, and at the same time hold it tentatively, like not be like
Mhm.
blinded, see all of the holes in everything that we believe, and
Mhm.
yet be able to see the good in it, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
bad too, but
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have to hold it tentatively.
Yeah, and two things can be true at once. This can be the thing that speaks to you the most, but also maybe isn't the most perfect. I think there might be a lot of emphasis placed on like perfection, but I think when you react in certain moments, human instinct takes over, what you've grown up with takes over. So you're not always also going to behave perfectly. And one of this philosopher that I studied in college, which I thought was the most interesting, it says something similar to what you're saying. Hannah Arendt was always like, thinking is a journey, and some people get off of that train much sooner than others, and they just subscribe to whatever common thought tells them to. And she was a philosopher during like World War II, and she was talking about how so much of what Hitler was saying during that time, people just bought into it because they stopped thinking for themselves once you hear a loud enough voice. And sometimes in other ways that's culture, that's like it could be propaganda in the most extreme circumstances, but it's how far you choose to think through that and question that. And it is definitely like sometimes a disturbing and jarring process to be like, everyone grew up this way in my family, but now I'm going to decide to choose differently, or just choose differently. And in the things that you kind of were exploring, was there anything that you're willing to share that you were like, this is working and this is not working, and I don't want to perpetuate this either for future generations? If you had kids one day, I don't want to like have this something that's passed on.
Mm. So that's a really good question. I think I really had to sit with what is meant by gender equity, and really kind of think through that in my own life, growing up in my family, what it meant, having brothers and, definitely very powerful male figures in my family, then getting married and, heterosexual marriage, and then what that means, what does gender equity really mean? And I feel like, and the all of my thinking has not given me clarity. It has given me more, I feel
Questions.
more
Yeah.
questions about, it is easy, I think, to just uh, see things in black or white.
Mhm.
But I think you have to stay in those gray areas. You have
Yeah.
to sit in those fences and those borderlands, so that you can understand all voices, right?
Mhm.
So I think, and it's very difficult, but I feel like that even in my work with clients, um, how do we empower ourselves and speak up,
Mhm.
and at the same time be willing to see our own power
Mhm.
in our ability to hurt others, or
Mhm.
our ability to overpower others. So having to see within ourselves both parts, I think that has been my most difficult growth, I feel,
Mhm.
in relationships, especially in patriarchal societies. What does power mean? What does my voice as a woman mean, as a mother mean, as a sister, daughter? I think coming into my own power, and at the same time being able to understand that I have had the power to also hurt and overpower and oppress. And I think seeing all of those,
Ooh,
I
very
find
powerful.
most difficult. And I think
Yeah.
if I want to perpetuate, I guess being able to again sit in that gray area and being able to see both and
Mhm.
not to villainize anyone. Uh,
Mhm.
so yeah, so I think that is probably something that I would bring.
I think that's a huge gift also, the fact that you're willing to think things through like this. I know it sounds so simple, but I don't think a lot of people sit down and really ever do that. And the villainizing is hard because the way I want to villainize how South Asian men are raised day
Hmm.
in and day out, I could talk about it for hours, but it's hard. It's like, it's a product of so many things, and then you realize how sometimes like women are the biggest perpetrators of like misogyny and internalized misogyny, and it's just such a tangled web. So the fact that you're like, you can just sit in questioning and in thinking about it and in
Yeah.
just choosing slightly differently, I think that's really powerful, because I don't even think a lot of people want to go there to question it. And my friend says this all the time when we talk about it. In her family especially, a lot of the women have, since she was really young, they'd be like, well, you'll need to learn how to deal with this because when you get married, it's going to be like this, and almost always preparing her for the worst. And when
Mm.
she's like, well, you guys told me marriage sucks, now I
Mhm.
don't want to get married, they're like, why would you ever say that? And it's like, you've made me think it's the worst thing ever to get married. Now it doesn't sound very appealing to me. And then for her and the women in her family to think like, oh, all the things I went through really sucked and were really horrible, and I actually didn't need to go through them. That's also just like, gosh, everything is so interconnected and so tangled. Really, really. How are we
Yeah,
getting out of this mess?
yeah,
Like,
absolutely. And I think it doesn't, the bad thing is everybody wants answers, and
I do. I really
I
do.
wish as a therapist I can say, here's your answer, go for it. But I think the answer really lies in being able to stay in those uncomfortable spaces and
Mhm,
being willing to stay there and willing to
mhm,
listen and
mhm.
hear things out. So I would say that's been my most difficult growth when it comes to just gender roles and relationship between the sexes, and and trying to find my way and understand it for myself. I have two daughters, so it means a lot to me.
Yeah.
What messages I send them, and I'm not sure that I always do I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I have to sit with it and
You're
be
trying. You're
open.
trying. That is great in and of itself. And my friends and I always talk about this. We're like, we think we know so much more, but I wonder in what ways we're going to traumatize our future children. I just know there's something, and it's going to take me by surprise and come out of left field when they're older and they're like, this is the baggage you gave me, and you think you're doing such a good job, and you're never perfect. And it's going to come up in some way, one way or another. Um, and I also wanted to ask, just because I feel like this is just a topic, again, that my friends and I were all like 27, 28, like in that range. And there's a lot of pressure to get married. Some face it more than others. I'm very lucky that my parents are not like putting that pressure on me. But when
Mm.
you think about like entering a partnership like that, you said you've had to question it a lot. Someone like Malala writes an entire essay in Vogue about how she said that she never wanted to get married and that she had to really also explore what marriage meant to her before marrying her now partner. What do you think are some good starting guiding questions to maybe ask yourself when like making that sort of commitment, or just getting to know yourself better and what you expect out of a partnership?
Um, Good question.
Yeah, loaded question.
What
Very
I'm
good.
trying to say, I want to say is, I think you you know just it's very similar to parenting. That there's a saying that says, becoming a parent is what gets you ready to be a parent, right?
Yeah.
I think you can think all you want, do all your research, you can go to as much therapy prior
Yeah.
to, but I think an intimate partner relationship
Yeah.
is you've got to get into the dynamic to even understand what that is. And each partnership is different from the other.
Yeah.
So just because
Yeah.
you've been in a different relationship
Yeah.
doesn't make you prepared for the next one. Because
Mhm.
the next one, the dynamics in the next one is just so different, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
It is new all over again, and you learn things about you, different things about yourself in different relationships.
Mhm.
So we're not static. Relationships are not static. I think again, it's really being prepared for sitting in a place of discomfort.
Mhm.
Relationships are not comfortable, and
You're not
if
selling me on this. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I know I'm not, because I think that's where the problem
Yeah.
comes, when people, because we buy into romanticized versions of
Mhm.
marriage and relationships and partnerships, which I think you've got to enjoy it for what it is, which is there. I always say my life is full. There's never a dull moment.
Mhm.
So I want to enjoy the fights that I have, the good moments that I have. That's what it's the masala. You've got to have everything in it. Otherwise, it's
Yeah.
bland, mac and cheese. Not that I don't like mac and cheese, but I
Yeah.
get very sick of it very quickly, right?
Yeah.
You've
Yeah.
got I think relationships are that, that whatever that masala is, and you've got to be prepared for being on the edge, and be flexible. And I think it's good to just work on yourself as best as you
Yeah.
can, but you got to
Yeah.
jump into it at some point. And
Yeah.
you've got to trust the process. You have to trust the process. You can't have it all worked out.
Oh my
uh,
God. Do you see me sweating? Do you see me sweating? Because I think in my generation, there is a lot of like listening to podcasts, reading, defining ourselves constantly. But from what you're saying, yeah, I think when you have perspective and also just the research to back this up and you look at it, you're really prepared for who you are when you're doing all that podcasting, journaling, reading for maybe who you are for the next 6 months. And then after that, you're like, I don't know who I'm going to be after that. I don't know who this person is going to be after that. I don't know who this person, once they change in a year, several years, what that's going to bring out in me. You really just don't know. And yeah, from what you're saying, it feels like you just need another person who's also willing to at least talk it through in those moments and not just like completely shut down. That seems like to be like the basic bare minimum that you can ask for to make any of this, fingers crossed,
yes.
as harmonious as possible for as much of it as possible.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like a roller coaster, right? Like that's
Yeah.
why roller coasters are fun, because there's never a dull moment, right? And
Yeah.
that's what relationships are, and you've got to go in for the ride and for the thrill, and then be able to adapt to it as you go.
Yeah. Yeah. And
It's
then
not for the faint of heart, for sure.
oh my God. Okay. I'm taking all of this back to my parents and being like, you need to listen to this interview and then consider what you're suggesting to me in general, because I'm 26. But yeah, I also think it's really nice to hear this because I also have friends who are very like, I am so sad that I'm not on that path just yet. And now what we call not being on that path is our season of peace. And I think that name sounds, or that label sounds probably more fitting after you talk about this roller coaster, is that this is your season of peace, because the season of chaos is coming. It's coming, but at least you won't be in your 20s mostly to handle that chaos. So I think that's probably for the best.
I would say though that peace gets kind of boring very quickly.
It does. It does. Because on Saturday morning, Sunday morning, when your friend calls you, there's nothing to talk about. You're like, this is what I bought on Amazon, but literally nothing else is going on in my life. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is in my early 20s, I feel like every single thing that happened felt like it was the end of the world. But now when that little bit of drama, that little bit of spice happens, you're just like, okay, this is like fun. This is like story time. This is what the Real Housewives are all thriving and surviving on. So I get to live that for a second. And then now that I'm a little bit older and not like 21 anymore, 19, I'm like, I kind of understand why reality TV exists, because your life could go that way really quick. So yeah. And now with your work right now, like what is it that you're exploring, and how is it like changing at this phase of your life after being a mom and all of this? What are you hoping to get into next, and how is that affecting the work that you do?
Right. Currently, I have teen kids. I'm bringing up bicultural kids, right? Because my kids were born here, and so I'm very interested. I have a big interest in play therapy and working with kids too. That's an area of interest for me, and I'm kind of diving in my own research, diving into parent-teen relationships in South Asian
Wow.
families. There, it's not that it's not known, but we have really not heard teens' voices. I think we have heard accounts of adults who reflect back on their life as teens and how their parents were, but we really want to hear from the teens, and that's what we are doing. We're interviewing teens right now as
Yeah.
we speak. We are getting our
Yeah.
participants, and it's been so much fun so far to
Yeah.
hear the interviews that I've had with my teens. It's really, I think we have some really rich data, which I think are going to be very helpful for South Asian parents to hear. So I think that's immediately in the immediate future. That's kind of what I'm working on, but I'm really hoping, to do more outreach into the South Asian community. I think, especially when it comes to couple relationships, you the way into the community is through children, because we focus so much on children, and parents would come to therapy for kids, not for themselves, right? But I think what I really want to target is couple relationships, and because that's where we really need to work on, so that they're able to uh, you know create or become the parents that they want to become. So my hope is that I can make that a big deal as well. So my future research is probably going to go in that direction, but for
Wow.
now I'm sticking to parenting relationships.
That is so cool and so interesting. I can't wait to see what comes out of it, because I feel like we finally have shows like Never Have I Ever that show maybe a slightly different, parent teen growing up in the US type relationship. So the fact that your work is like actually focusing on this from an academic perspective is super cool and super interesting. And Sahas recently did this like multi-generational panel with Cerritos College, and they had their teen organization or their teen chapter speak. And I'm a little scared of high schoolers. Like, I just think that they think I'm really old and like lame, and I'm not that much older. But when they're like, you went to high school 10 years ago, I'm like, yeah, I did. I graduated high school 10 years ago, which is even worse. No, something like that. I'm not good at math. But I think it's so interesting, and they're so smart. And I think the way they discuss these dynamics is so completely different. And they have a vocabulary that I feel like even a few years ago when I was in high school, I probably did not have and did not know. So the fact that your work is capturing like teens in this highly connected, highly informative era where they're able to sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, like self-diagnose really, really easily and have that language is so cool and so interesting. And I cannot wait to like hear more about everything that you do.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And we're basically at time. Is there anything else that you kind of want to like mention or cover, or any like resources that you might want to highlight?
I think Sahas is a great resource. I think there are people there working, and so is other organizations that we have, like SAN and Sahara. We are fortunate to be in California, where we have quite a bit of resources out there for South Asians. But I would just really have families reach out and try therapy out, and if it fits them, to go for it, to try it out. I think it's really helpful to have that experience,
Mhm.
to have that space,
Mhm.
to try that out. Like, how does it feel to have that space where I can
Mhm.
speak what I have in my mind and try to
Mhm.
figure myself out, right? I think that's a very powerful space to be in. So
Mhm.
I would say try therapy out. Try
Yeah.
therapy, try couples therapy, try parent-child therapy. You're just better for it.
Period.
Um,
I think that is a great message. And speaking of which, can I ask you one more question selfishly, and then I'm definitely letting you go. What do you think of Esther Perel? And have you I think she is now even my generation's therapist go-to person, like Brene Brown and Esther Perel. There are two white ladies that we go to for everything. And she had that show, Couples Therapy, I think it was literally called. What do you think of her work? Have you seen the show? I promise this is the last question.
she's absolutely phenomenal. I think words of wisdom. I use both her, Brene Brown.
Yeah.
Those are all people that I refer to when I'm teaching my classes. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Those are people that you do need to hear. And the good thing about Esther Perel is that she has gone more into mainstream media. And
Mm,
because people like me, we tend to stay in academia, and then
mm,
it gets lost
mm,
because for the uh, community don't kind of, there's a big gap between
mhm.
academia and the layperson.
Yeah.
And I really commend her for really trying to bridge that gap and reach out and make her material accessible.
Mhm,
So absolutely, I just love her work,
mhm.
her view on, especially on gender related issues, are just amazing, just words of wisdom.
Okay,
So
you heard it here first. Dr. Raji's work. We're going to check your work out first. But then also Esther Perel's TV show on, I think it's Showtime or HBO. I think it's on Amazon Prime, but it's called Couples Therapy. So it's been approved by you, and that's the only cosign that we need. And then we're going to figure out how to get you a show. I think you need a show next. That's like the big thing. You're like, I don't want a show, but we have to get you one because I mean, I really enjoyed talking to you. I think you're so cool. And I really think you've broken down such complex concepts in a really digestible way. So, like you said, try therapy. That's the message of this whole session. Just give it a shot. Give it a shot. But yeah,
thank
thank
you.
you so much for being here again. And we will leave some of the resources and stuff that you meant in the bio of this show once it's published. But yeah, thank you so much again for being here. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I feel very honored, and thank you for giving me the platform.
Of course, of course. All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Namaskar, Sat Sri Akal, welcome and adab. You are listening to Bharat FM, a one-of-its-kind, multilingual, eclectic provider of entertainment, information and news to Indian Americans. Headquartered in Cincinnati, Ohio, Bharat FM airs shows out of Cincinnati, Chicago and Phoenix. We take pleasure in our ability to cater to your bhakti, chusti, sfurti, shakti and masti needs with our audio and visual shows. Check out bharatfm.com for our online program schedule and archives. I'm sure the content will definitely tickle your senses. Tune in via the 24-hour web streaming on bharatfm.com or via the Bharat FM app. More information can be procured at 513-488-5077.